everyone, Liana here. I'm here to talk to you a bit more about the topic on supercharging developer productivity, game-changing insights from government coding assistant experiments. So we did some experiments here within GovTech about the use of AI tools for coding, and we wanted to share with you a bit more about it in this presentation. So software development in the public sector today is in a very highly regulated environment. I think oftentimes issues that we face are quite similar to that of the in the private sector industry, but we do face certain requirements which give us very little room for mistakes and inefficiencies. So we're always on the lookout for things that could help us to be a bit more productive. And before I went into the findings from the study, I thought I would give you a bit of background as to what actually led us to do this study. So within our team here, we manage a tool called Sheepheads, which is essentially our source code management and CI/CD platform. So we're all about how can we help developers to be more productive using some of these central tools. So it wasn't a very surprising that we actually started to look into how AI can help in the whole software development lifecycle. And that's what we aim to do through Sheepheads. So Sheepheads has garnered a pretty good user base. We have about close to 5,000 users today and many agencies on board. So we thought it was actually a good way for us to get our users to start using some of these tools and to kind of study how they were benefiting from these tools. So supercharging developer productivity sounds like a very big thing to do, but it's actually very common these days. Today, you can see in the market, there are many tools out there that help in developer productivity, and a lot of these are using AI. So you have things like GitHub Copilot, Codium, Cursor, and these are all transforming how developers are developing software today. The industry has also shown that there's a lot of productivity gains on such AI powered tools. And so, our mission with this whole study was to see how we can use AI to augment productivity while aligning to some of our DevSecOps workflows and governance. So, let's talk about how AI can accelerate development and help us adopt best practices through an example. So you can see this example here is actually an example of how you can code something manually, but you can also use the Copilot assistance to enhance the code. So this code here is fetching data requests from data.gov.sg, which is another one of our central tools. So the logic here is simple, but it lacks robustness. You can see here on the left, using the manually written code, that if the API fails or returns an unexpected structure, the code could break. So what Copilot has done was to provide some additional best practices through the code. So, for example, adding a try except block for API and passing errors, introducing logging for better issue tracking, and splitting the code into modular functions to enhance readability and usability. So you can see here that there are some benefits of the automated assisted code, better error handling. We can avoid runtime crashes from API issues. There are logging, which is make it easier to debug in production, and the modular functions enable it to be easier to maintain and extend the code. So you can see how Copilot actually accelerates the development of the code and also helps us to instill some best practices within the code, leading to better code quality outcomes. So interestingly, if you look at the whole coding assistant landscape, the question we might ask is that while AI can augment our team's capabilities, what more is possible? And this is something we sought to understand through the study. So for the study, what we did was we based it off the SPACE framework. If you're not familiar with it, SPACE basically looks at 5 core components that are satisfaction, looking at developer well-being and motivation, performance, effectiveness in completing tasks, activity, time spent coding, testing and reviews, communication, team collaboration, and lastly, efficiency, quality and speed improvements. And we believe that higher ratings in terms of SPACE could also lead to better outcomes, and that's how we are measured through the DORA metrics. So things like deployment frequency, lead time for changes, something that we are trying to also do a bit more tracking of here within the government. So let's look at how we can look at more than just speed or coding assistance, but other elements as well. So what we did was that we had a pilot with some government developers, really getting them to use GitHub Copilot and GitLab Duo. This lasted for about 4 months, and we captured some data from this. So the scope of the pilot included about 70 participants, and they range from junior to senior developers. Interestingly, we found that the developers feedback that they don't spend 100% of their time on development work. I think most developers would know that some of the time are spent on other tasks like collaboration, planning, And perhaps they spend about 50% of their time using coding, doing coding and using coding assistant tools. It was good that we managed to get developers who code regularly on a daily basis into the study. So this really helps us understand the nuances of the effects of using coding assistant tools, and also helping us to find the best approaches to effectively harness the benefits from coding assistant usage. So we started by, of course, asking the right questions, and we based our questions around the space framework. In addition to that, we also obtained telemetry data from the tool providers. So together, we were able to have both objective and subjective data to measure the impact of these coding assistant tools. So the roles of developers will change definitely with AI, but how will it change? What we found from the survey was that generally most developers were a lot happier using the coding assistant tools. So, firstly, they saw a 12% gain in productivity. 95% of them reported improved satisfaction, which means they were happier doing their work, which is really important. Thirdly, they were able to achieve better flow, which means uninterrupted work or being able to focus on the task at hand. Fourthly, we found that interestingly, when it comes to exposing vulnerabilities early, the feedback was that the coding assistant tools were not able to do that well just yet. And lastly, in terms of learning rapidly, it was a maybe. People were on the fence about whether coding assistants really aided in learning new languages and new frameworks. We also found that the experiences varied amongst senior developers versus junior developers. The results were pretty clear. Junior developers saved more time, while senior developers actually feedback that they saved less time. It was possibly because the senior developers thought that the tool was able to help automate some of the repetitive tasks, but they still had a lot of tasks that required their kind of things that an AI coding assistant could not do, such as solving complex problems. Interestingly, we also found that seniors were worried that Copilot may cause juniors to develop bad habits because they may not have the know-how to be able to know how to discern between good code and bad code. So the results are still kind of out there when it comes to the experiences between junior and senior developers. Now let's look at the future of productivity. But at the same time, if you look at the space framework, there were two components relating to collaboration, efficiency, and we mustn't forget, and we mustn't actually have these trade-offs when it comes to looking at these tools. So let's look at two dimensions when it comes to communication, collaboration, efficiency, and flow. It was interesting that we found that the AI-driven improvements actually help with documentation somewhat. When it comes to reduction in duration of code reviews, it was still a no from our developers. And when it came to understanding code of others, it was a somewhat. So I think there's still a lot for us to learn from these coding assistant tools in how it can aid more in communication and collaboration. When it came to efficiency and flow, there was a reported reduced coding time and, of course, an increase in coding speed. At the same time, as I shared earlier, there was a reduction in interruptions and people were able to stay in the flow. So that's a very good finding. All right. Now, there are many, many metrics to measure out there. And here we are also still trying to identify what would be the most important metric to measure. If you look at the metrics that are available, there are things like average prompt acceptance rates, lines of code integrated, which looks at the AI's contribution, error reduction, as well as time saved per task. Here we are sharing with you a snippet of what the prompt acceptance rate looks like for the different languages. So we have dashboards that monitor key metrics, one of which is looking at the languages when it comes to the telemetry data. So we found that Terraform and TypeScript had the highest acceptance rates, nearly 30%, suggesting some form of alignment with the AI models recommendations and strengths. In contrast, Java had a much lower acceptance rate of 5%, highlighting the challenges with this specific language. And of course, we expect that some of these data will change over time as the models improve. But this is an indication that actually the experience really varies when it comes to the languages or the frameworks that are being used. All right, so what's next? Now that we've kind of done the pilot study, we've actually written a paper and I'll share with you more details later. How do we sustain the learning from the AI coding assistants while managing expectations for quick outcomes? So, looking at the program thus far, we've gotten about more than 400 signups across the government, and we are really hoping that more government developers will use these tools. We are seeing that there are quite a lot of active users today, though we are also trying to drive for more. What we've done so far is that we've made GitHub Copilot and Codium available, and we're looking to make more tools available for our users. I think we are actually adopting an approach where we are most likely going to look at providing an array of tools, not just one tool in particular. However, when it comes to actually rolling out these tools, there are some barriers that we need to kind of overcome. So, firstly, it's about policy constraints. So, the current tools that are available on the cloud are only limited to open classified code. So, majority of the tools fall into this realm. And if you're familiar with the government setup, there are code that's restricted or classified. So, those kind of code can't use these tools because the data can't leave Singapore. So for that, we are also looking at whether we should self-host some of the tools using Codium, Llama, and any other alternatives that are available in the market. Another thing that we're also trying to do is try to see whether we can kind of relook at some of our policies so that we can actually enable the policy to support the use of these tools while still maintaining some of the security requirements required of us. Next, we are always looking at monitoring productivity. So we've actually developed a dashboard for us to be able to pull telemetry data from the various providers. We're trying to see whether we can develop a single pane of glass that can monitor across the different tools so that it's easier for us to be able to kind of measure really how productive are people when they are using these tools, and how much does using AI coding assistance contribute towards overall developer productivity. Another thing that we've been trying to do, and this is about a bit of a softer thing, is looking at fostering engagement and learning. So, since we started this program, we've actually rolled out a Telegram chat group for our developers to connect. We have had some meetups. We held regular AMAs with the principal product owners at Codium, and we've always had kickoff briefings with Copilot, Codium, and we are also doing a workshop with GitLab Duo coming up actually during this tech conference. Now, to conclude, there are many opportunities to transform public sector software development lifecycle with AI. I think we can see that the productivity benefits will really benefit our citizens who we are developing applications for. Secondly, we're also looking at how we can enable smaller teams to take on larger projects. We're also trying to see how we can move away from monitoring just individual developer productivity to looking at monitoring team level productivity. That's something new that we're working on. Thirdly, I think if you look at it, when it comes to development work, higher satisfaction and reducing the cognitive load on developers can actually lead to happier developers. And of course, looking at helping us to improve the retention of talents within the public sector. And lastly, I thought this was something important to call out. We have noticed that our business stakeholders are very excited when it comes to AI because they're very excited to see how AI can help when it comes to faster delivery and improved app quality. At the same time, we know that our tech teams are also saying that it's not a silver bullet, and we truly agree. The tech teams are emphasizing that AI will augment, not replace the work, and an over reliance is really not something that we want when it comes to AI. So we need to be able to find a happy medium between using the tools for productivity, but at the same time still making sure that we are increasing when it comes to our knowledge and our capabilities. And lastly, I think we'll share some takeaways and next steps. So, as I shared earlier, there were some instances when AI still has its limitations. There are still some hallucinations, even when you use all these tools today. And that actually points to us that you do still need some manual oversight for code quality. Not everything, but you still need to do code reviews to make sure that everything is in order, especially when it comes to working with junior developers. Secondly, I think we've come to the realization that because if you look at it earlier just now when I shared, the language capabilities or the prompt acceptance varies across the different languages. So this points to us that perhaps different models are better for different languages. So we may consider using a multi-model approach for scalability. And another thing is also perhaps looking at a more common tech stack to enable more productivity and more cross-learning across developers. And the third point is on the SDLC impact. So far, our pilots have focused more on code automation. I think the next round for the next few months, we'll focus a bit more on workflows and broader AI functions. As you can see here, at every stage in the development lifecycle, there are many opportunities and gaps that can benefit from AI. And lastly, of course, we are looking at exploring self-hosted models and also refining our impact assessments. And as I shared earlier, looking to move from individual developer productivity to team level productivity. I hope this sharing has been useful. I would love to continue this conversation when we have an opportunity in the future. So please feel free to reach out. In the meantime, perhaps I'll leave you with this QR code to the paper that we've written on this pilot study report. So in the presentation today, I shared some of our findings, but you find a lot more of the findings in the paper because we didn't have time to go through it in detail today. So do maybe take a pause here and maybe scan this QR code. And lastly, if you need to reach out to me, you can always reach out to me either through my email address, also on LinkedIn. Thank you.